Well, hello, everyone. I'm Michael Fischer, President and CEO of Client First Financial. I'd like to welcome you to our podcast series, Everything But the Money. Today is our second episode where we're going to be talking about the value of communication. And I am very honored to have two guests joining us today. Eric Strauss, partner of the law firm Gross McGinley in Allentown, and Bill Bloss, CPA and partner at RLB Advisors, also in Allentown. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. And I think we're going to have a good conversation. But before we get into today's topic, which is the value of communication, I just wanted to talk and recap what we talked about in our first episode, which was just the power of legacy planning. And when I started out with this first episode, the first thing I wanted everyone to remember was, we all have a legacy. It's not just for the affluent. It's basically how you're known and how you want to be remembered. So how you go about this, establishing your legacy plan is first identifying what your principal values and beliefs are. Once you have that in order, then it's a matter of putting your plan in alignment with those principal values and beliefs. And then once you have that, the solutions that you put into the plan are easy to follow as long as the principal values and beliefs and the plan are all in alignment. But then we come to the fourth step, and that's where we're going to start with our conversation today. Communicating what your plan is to your family members and key stakeholders. And that's where I wanted to bring in both Eric and Bill. And to start the conversation, Eric, we'll start with you. What are some of the experiences that you've seen when it comes to settling, people's estates and some of the issues that you've come across?
The good, the bad, the ugly. The vast majority of the estates I handle are ones that I've been involved in, so they tend to run pretty smoothly. The ones that are problematic, and I've been doing this for 35 years. I do a lot of estate planning, I do a lot of estate administration work, and over the years I've done a lot of estate-related litigation. So that's the ugly. I've fully litigated several will contests, and usually they're the result of poor communication. Not always bad actors, although we have that too. But and many times they're the result of failed communication. One thing I see often is a failure of what I would call the usually it's the parent, right? To particularly where it's not what I would call a natural disposition of wealth. So if it's a first marriage, 3 kids, and the will says to my kids equal shares, and the IRA beneficiary designation says to the kids in equal shares. I mean, that's not controversial. Those tend to be smooth. But anytime where someone's altering that, from that path, whether it's one beneficiary has special needs, maybe one beneficiary has a problem handling money, maybe a parent did something for one child during the parent's lifetime and they want to make an unequal distribution at their death to sort of balance that out. Where those things are not communicated, it tends to breed distrust and accusations start flying around. And that's where, as a lawyer, I mean, that's where we see problems. So, by all means, having that family discussion, the transparency, particularly where there is what I would say not a natural, even Steven disposition of wealth, that's where those discussions among family members and some transparency can be helpful. Having said that, there are some clients who do not want to communicate their wishes to their children. And as a lawyer, I need to respect that. I need to know that I'm acting in accordance with my client's wishes. Anything a client tells me is confidential. Some clients authorize me to share information with kids, others don't. So that's something I'm always very mindful of. To the extent that any of the folks in the audience are involved with their parents' estate plan, for instance. It wouldn't be unusual for an attorney to say, hey, I need you to stay in the waiting room while I talk to mom or dad or both of them alone, just to make sure I'm getting the accurate picture of what that person, my client, wants to achieve.
Okay. All right. And we'll talk about that a little bit further later in the podcast. But Bill, what have your experiences been over the years?
Yeah, I think it's important for the sake of your listeners. I'll focus on the ugly of the ugliest cases. One being just a situation where dad had passed away several years ago, held a lot of real estate, different rental properties, and a couple of homes. Unfortunately, mom didn't understand how to handle those affairs. Kids got involved, and the fighting ensued. And so nothing happened. There was no communication. Everything just stopped at that point when the fights ensued because everybody wanted their piece of the pie. The problem now has become that mom now has dementia and can't communicate anything to the kids. So this is going to be ugly. A second one I'd like to bring to everyone's attention, we'll talk later about the importance of reviewing beneficiaries on various accounts. Had a situation where there was a divorce and dad married the younger, newer version of his first wife, but he failed to change the beneficiaries on his multi-million-dollar retirement account. So, of course, that money didn't go to his existing wife, went to his ex-wife, and the lawsuits ensued. There's one case I experienced over my career that it will stick with me forever. This particular client was really good at communicating with his professional team, but he kept his kids out of the loop. There's the divorce matter. He got divorced, and not long after, he committed suicide. Now, fortunately, the professionals knew all the ins and outs of his estate. We weren't expecting this, of course, but to have to sit down with those kids after the fact and walk them through that was really painful. But the positive thing out of that was at least the professional advisors had a good idea of what was happening and what his wishes were. So we were able to make it work out for the best out of what was really obviously a terrible situation.
So, so it sounds like, and I've had similar experiences with clients for various reasons. I have some that one client hasn't spoken to her brother since the passing of mom and dad, and now refers to him as sibling. That's how bad it got. So when we talk about why most legacies fail, and I've been looking into this for the last several years because as my clients have been getting older, we've done well with building up the assets, and now it's time to start thinking about, okay, what do we want the legacies to be? I came across a book entitled Philanthropy, Heirs, and Values. It's a book that was written by Roy Williams and Vic Presser. And in that book, they looked at 1,000 estates. And in those 1,000 estates, 700 of them failed. 60% of the time, they failed because of a lack of communication. 25% of the time is because the heirs or those who were in charge, like the executors, executrixes, weren't even prepared. They had no idea what to do. And what I found amazing was it was only 15% failed due to either tax or law documents not being prepared properly. So it really came down to preparing the heirs and communicating to them properly. Jessica, could you get us to the next slide, please? So, next one, Jessica. Keep on going. There we go. So why do most legacies fail? As we've all just mentioned, it's the lack of communication. And really what we're talking about are two different groups. We have the family, which we have just discussed, and then we have the outside professionals. All right. So we have internal, external communication that have to exist in order to make this work. So next slide, Jessica. So when we talk to most of our clients have de facto teams. They all have an accountant, they have an attorney, and they have a financial advisor. But the problem is they've never really had each other, or these professionals, come and talk to each other when it came to the legacy planning. They all have their separate conversations. So what you end up having are three different sets of ideas. And some of the challenges that you run into, and I heard it earlier, is, you have egos, and egos not by necessarily the financial planning team, but by the family members themselves. And there's territorial issues where one feels more entitled to another. So what I'm trying to get everyone to start understanding is we need to have structured communication through meetings between the planning team and the family meeting. And I heard you guys say it earlier. It's important that the planning team meet and get on the same page with the client, so that when it does come time for the family meeting, now we know, okay, here is what we've been thinking about. Here are our principal values and beliefs. Here is what we plan on doing, and here's how we're going to distribute things. We've already taken care of the planning team. Now it's time for the family meeting. So let me go back to Bill and Eric. Have you guys ever had meetings with the team, the planning team, the CPA, the attorney, the financial advisor, where you all came working together? Have you had experiences like that? And if you had, how did the legacy or the estate plan figure out at the end? Was it much smoother, or did you still run into some issues? Bill, why don't
Eric, you
you
want
go
to go
first?
first?
Yeah, you go first, Bill.
Okay. Let me say this, right? It's really important that that first step is with the professional team and the professional team only. All right, because you don't want what I refer to as a lot of noise in the room. And if you bring kids in, we talk about family dynamics, you can call it egos and entitlement issues, but everyone has their special interest, right? It's very rare that all siblings are on the same page with the same interest, right? And the interest should be to make sure mom and dad's wishes come true, right? And that they can leave their legacy the way they want, right? So it's important that when the client comes to that professional team, certain things are in place. The first thing, I'm a big fan of creating a personal financial statement, right? What are your assets? What are your liabilities? What's your net worth? It's really critical. And not just in dollars and cents, but also knowing all the background information. Somebody has to have access at some point to all those accounts, all those documents, right? You're going to come to the table with perhaps employment contracts, or you may have sold a business and you've got deferred compensation coming to you. Everybody needs to know what is happening in your life. You need that background so that when the time comes, we can put the plan together properly, and then we can then later communicate it to the kids. So to come to that first meeting, have that personal financial statement in place with all the supporting documentation, the know-hows, the how-tos, the account numbers, the passwords. Again, we're going to keep these things under lock and key, keep them secure, obviously. Even something as silly as, believe it or not, your telephone, right? Some people keep a lot of information on their telephone, but if you're no longer here, I don't know if anybody's going to use Face ID, face recognition, to open your phone. So perhaps a pass key on your phone would be helpful, right? So having all that information in place is really the first step. You meet with the professionals, set your plan in place, and then we can have meetings with the kids. That's when it goes the best. That's the best case scenario, getting back to the communication piece.
Well,
All right.
and Bill, a moment ago, you mentioned beneficiary designations, and
Yes.
I continually see clients who miss, sometimes it's the most basic concepts are the ones that are overlooked. And, I do a similar intake. I need to know, even though someone says, oh, all I need is a will. Maybe that's true, maybe not. People need to understand, and as professionals, we need to help them gather information so they understand that their IRA is not controlled by their will. That, to me, that's a very basic concept. But a lot of clients come in and they say, well, I want to do this with my will, even if it's 3 kids and equal shares. And you learn that the beneficiary designation for the IRA was completed when there were only 2 kids and they're the only 2 named. Or maybe in someone's estate plan, whether it's their will or the revocable trust, there is a unique beneficiary with particular needs. And we structure trusts that would hold wealth for that beneficiary to accommodate their special conditions. And we do all that planning. And then in the absence of a team meeting between professionals, they go to their advisor and the advisor says, well, just name that beneficiary outright. Well, you've completely diffused all the work you did with your lawyer designing a trust for that person. So it's important to understand how different buckets are going to be filled within the estate plan. And I've had clients, all I need is a will. Why do you need to know all this information? And I tell them, if you went to a doctor and said, Doc, give me surgery right now, the doctor would probably say, well, hold on, I need to do an x-ray, I need to do some blood work. No, I want the surgery. A doctor's not going to cut you open in that situation. So I think it's extremely valuable, whether it's a formal meeting around a conference room table or by email exchange, or like what we're doing right now, and you can do it with a Zoom call, where the team gets together and makes sure everyone's on the same page. I have a tragic situation a couple months ago where a 90-year-old gentleman, client of mine, longtime client, had a son, 65 years old, who had very serious heart problems throughout his adult life. And we had an estate plan designed to accommodate that. This client had a substantial sum of money, close to $800,000, in a large account with a brokerage firm. And the broker, without letting anyone know, other than the client, said, hey, put your son's name on the account as a joint owner. You'll avoid probate, and then your son can access the account to pay your bills if he gets sick. Well, he already had a power of attorney in place, so that wasn't necessary. But what the advisor failed to recognize is that in Pennsylvania, when the owner of a joint account dies, the survivor pays inheritance tax on half the value of the account. Doesn't matter who funded the account. I mean, as a lawyer, that's a very basic concept to me, but that escaped the attention of the advisor. So when the son died, I had to tell this 90-year-old gentleman that he owed inheritance tax, which was a 4.5% tax on half the value of that account. That's a heck of a thing to tell a 90-year-old guy at his 65-year-old son's funeral. So I mean, that's and things like that happen all the time. People sometimes outside of the team make recommendations, and our clients are left to sort of, floating in the breeze, so to speak.
So Eric, what you're saying is we shouldn't get our advice from TikTok?
No. or the neighbor, the guy you're talking to over the fence line, because everyone's situation is different.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So, is it your experience, both of you, that have you had those conversations with the accountant or the financial advisor that, hey, look, I just met with Charlie Smith, and he's telling me that he has his accounts with beneficiaries that may be something that we should talk about. Do you have those conversations to try and get people on the same page?
I can tell you, if I discover something like that, Mike, I don't go directly to the financial advisor. I will say to the client, this is what I believe we need to do in this case. Let's set a meeting for all of us to get together. I don't want to go back and forth in that manner. I'd rather get us all in a room or all on a Zoom call.
Okay, I agree.
And I would always secure the client's permission to talk to any other member of the team. I mean, that goes without saying.
And that's I didn't mean to say that. No, you bypass it. No. The client is the boss. Okay, we're just there to be at the service of the client. So I understand that, but that makes a lot of sense. If you see something that doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, let's try and do a quick meeting, however that may be, Zoom, in person, or what have you, and let's just kind of figure out a few things. I think it'll solidify the relationship between the advisor, the attorney, and the accountant, having that kind of meeting, so that, look, as you said, all kinds of things can happen. We don't know. We don't expect somebody to, commit suicide. We don't expect somebody to have that heart attack. I mean, that's the whole idea behind the planning, right? But the more that we're on the same page, just the easier it's going to be. So let me move on to the next.
Well, and Mike, if I may,
Go ahead.
Oftentimes, I put estate plans together that oftentimes the advisor is an important part of implementing them. If I have a client with a unique beneficiary that we're designing a trust for, I'll tell that client, look, your IRA, which is going to pass by a beneficiary designation, don't name that child as a beneficiary. Name the trust that we've set up for that child as the beneficiary of the IRA. And then I send them to you, and you help them make sure that that form is filled out correctly.
Yes.
So that, I mean, that's another classic example of how the team works together.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of the best practices for a family meeting? Okay, we've got ourselves on the same page as the planning team. We've discussed with the client, all right, here are the reasons why we want to make changes either into titles, beneficiaries, or selling a certain asset based on all the things that we've talked about: taxes, minimize estate and inheritance taxes, and just passing things correctly. So now we come to the family meeting. So a lot of times when I tell folks about the family meeting, they go, "Well, how do you do it?" And this is something that is relatively new to many people. They have no idea because they never gave it any thought. So sometimes they'll say, "Is it okay to do it virtually, or should we do it in person? Or should we do it at our home, or should we do it at the office of one of our trusted advisors?" And I'll get into the trusted advisor in just a second briefly. So the answer is it depends. How do you want to do it? Like if you have a son or daughter who lives in California and you're in Pennsylvania, well, having them come in person, yeah, they may come in, for a holiday or something. So you may want to do it virtually. Um, so it's really up to the client how they want to have it done. And then who do you want to be involved in that meeting? Do you want the trusted advisor, which could be any of us, or it could even be an outside person who they've just relied on over the years. That could be an office manager. It could be anyone. It could be just someone that they really valued having around. It could be a family member as well. But once you have the meeting, what do you talk about? All right. And one thing I'm starting to really push people towards is, let's talk about the ethical will. Now, the ethical will is not a formal document, but it's just really laying out things like, I want to be remembered this way, or I'd like to see you guys use your inheritance that way. Or it could be something like, you know what? We always went to the Outer Banks for vacation. I want that tradition to continue. And I'm going to pass the carving knife to Joe. He can cut the family turkey, for example. It's that kind of bond that can keep the family together. But then, not only that, you also want to talk about, okay, Beth, you're the executor. And you tell everyone else in that family, Beth is the one who's going to be in charge of dispersing everything. She's the one who's going to be working with Eric and Bill and Mike Fischer. And so don't bother her. Don't keep on coming after her about when is the money going to come, okay? Because there's a lot involved. And that's also what needs to be communicated. The executor or executors, if you have more than one, there's a lot of work. And the more you're organized, as you guys, I think, will agree, the better it's going to be for everyone. But if mom and dad like squirrels and have their nuts all over the valley, you're just putting a lot of extra work into that estate plan. But it's important that they know this is what you're going to get. And I mean, this is what is going to be involved. And then you could talk about asset distribution. Now, I had a conversation recently where the people say, well, how do I go about doing that? Because we gave one son more than we've given to another. How do we go about doing that? And that's something that just needs to be discussed and kind of, in a delicate way that you're not going to start, people throwing the mashed potatoes across the table kind of thing. And so that's a very delicate conversation, but it's one that through planning with the attorney and the accountant and the advisor, maybe you can come to, this is how I think might be the best way for you to approach that. I mean, does that make sense to you guys about how do you have that conversation if you can get to that point with these folks?
Eric, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people ask me, hey, can't I just do my will on LegalZoom? Would that be a valid will? And they're surprised when I say it probably will be a valid will. Will it do what you hope to achieve? I have no idea. And that's where, we look at the context of a person's overall wealth, how things are going to pass. Again, are they going to pass by a beneficiary designation? Are they going to pass under a will? Are they going to pass under a trust agreement? Where there are unique situations, I mean, that's the value that professionals bring to the table. where someone wants a unique type of trust, where someone maybe has a beneficiary who's eligible for a means tested public benefit like Medicaid or SSI. Those need to be specially taken into account. And that's what lawyers and accountants and financial advisors are good at helping people put together. But we all need to be on the same page. After the plan is developed, some transparency within the family as to how it's going to be carried out it is very helpful in terms of setting people's expectations so that they're
Yes.
realistic.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, so when you talk about our executor Beth, I mean, a critical thing, I'm a little off topic here, but making sure that the Beths of the world are aware that you're naming them as the executor and they're willing to do it.
Yep.
A worse nightmare for people is to be, to find out after their loved one dies that they're the executor. It is not a job that people are sometimes comfortable handling. We work with executors all the time. Some are very good at what they do. They're very organized. They're very on top of things. Others are not. Others, we really have to, poke and prod and then, hey, we sent you this letter a week ago. We didn't hear from you. Or, hey, my paralegal called you 3 times. You're not getting back to her. We need this information. I mean, that can be a major problem.
I couldn't agree more. And Bill, how about yourself?
Yeah, one thing I want to emphasize that it's important for reviewers to understand that this family meeting is the first meeting after the advisors and mom and dad have set the plan in place, right? And I also want to mention that I mentioned earlier about the family dynamics. It seems that every family has, dare I say, one knucklehead in it, right? One sibling, that's that outlier, that can create some noise for us. So the more familiar we are with the plan that we're setting in place, the more confidence we have in it. And it'll, I think, set the tone for that initial family meetings. That communication, again, from the outset is really critical. So now you sit down with the kids and you say, this is what we're doing, as you like to refer to it as ethical will and value alignment. You can't argue with me, kids, because I've already set this plan in place. I'm just trying to communicate it to you in a way of, these are my values and this is what I want my legacy to be, and this is how it's going to happen. I really think that initial family meeting, where possible, should be in person, because oftentimes the siblings are not familiar with the professional advisors that are participating. It's one way of winning those folks over, as well as to say they can trust the folks that are, everybody here that's sitting at the table, including those professional advisors.
That's a great point, because if you don't have it in person, if they can't really see who the team is, they'll say, well, I've got a guy or I have a gal. They know
Right.
what's going on. They have no idea. But not only that, but here's the next part, a point I want to make, and it's the last part of this slide. It's, you don't set it and forget it. How often should you review this plan? Well, I suggest maybe every 3 to 5 years, or when there's after a significant life event. Now, what could that be? That could be the passing of somebody in that family who was part of this whole plan. It could be people moving to different states, because now the plan could be completely different if you move to a different state, and things like that. So I just think that reviewing the plan on a regular basis, 3 to 5 years, or when there's a significant event, life event, it makes sense. And, a life event could also be, hey, something I saw in society. I really want to be an advocate for change in that particular thing, whatever it may be. Okay. Because that could alter your plans too. And also some of the family may have gone like that one outlier may have come back into the fold. And that happens too every now and then. All of a sudden they realize, I came to grips with me not being the best person in the world. So does that make sense to you guys as well, to review that every 3 to 5 years or whenever there's a significant change?
I'll tell you what, Mike, one of the biggest significant changes I see my clients react to is the birth of yet another grandchild.
Yep.
And there go more 529 contributions, as they should, right? So yeah, that's one of those significant events, significant life events that can change the entire plan.
Okay. All right, Eric, you feel the same way?
Sure. When when we do estate plans, we're always saying, what if? You know, if what happens if this child dies before you? Does it go to that child's spouse? Does the share go to that child's children? If so, if they're minors, what happens at that point? So we're always trying to build that flow chart and take into account, you know, with some, you know, a reasonable degree, you know, what the future may hold. However, there is no substitute, and any major life event, you know, the death of a spouse, death of a child, disability of a spouse, you know, particularly in a situation where people use a revocable trust, often it's one spouse, and then the other spouse is a successor trustee. Well, if that spouse who's the successor trustee develops dementia or just isn't familiar with record keeping, becomes occupied with, you know, travel in their retirement, for example, we need to make sure that the right people are lined up to foster and to implement that plan. And those are things that are periodically worth revisiting.
Okay, all right. So, Jessica, next slide, please. So I just want to ask one question for each of you, if you could answer it. And Eric, I'll address the first one to you. How do families typically fail in their communication? What has your experience been?
Oh boy, you know, many ways. I think, you know, sometimes, so a common example I see is late in a person's life, their health is failing, and, you know, one child, maybe because they have the time or they're local, takes a greater role in caring for the parent. And many will contests that I've been involved arise out of this exact situation. You know, so over time, that child really earns a greater level of affection from the parent. And maybe they end up, you know, where the client says to me, look, this child's been really good to me. They've lived with me for 3 years. They take care of me. I want this child to get the house. But the client and I are the only ones that know that. And you know, that person dies, the will is probated, and everyone's accusing that child of what we call undue influence. You know, you twisted mom's arm and you made her give you the house. And so that's a common scenario where what someone really wanted to do to reward the special efforts of a particular child is challenged. Having said that, there are times where children overreach, where I get calls from the child, hey, my dad wants to give me his house. Can we set up an appointment? And I'm thinking, well, if dad wants to do that, why isn't dad the one who made the call? Point is, you know, after a person dies, how many people are aware of what the decision actually was and who made it? That's where the team of advisors comes in, because if a team of advisors is involved in constructing that particular estate plan, there's at least 2 or 3 other witnesses that would say, oh, no, we met with this person. You know, the child was not influencing them. They really had a special affection and wanted to give that child an extra sort of reward, if you will. So having litigated will contests, usually in the family, there's 2 factions, you know, and I can pretty much predict what one faction is going to say, and I can pretty much predict what the other faction is going to say. The ones who win those cases are the ones with independent witnesses who know what the plan was, who know why it was done. And that's where advisors can be critical witnesses in those cases.
The value of the planning team. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Bill, I'm going to pose a slightly different question to you. How can planning professionals improve, you know, their collaboration? What would you think? What would be some ideas that we could all improve, how we all communicate with each other and work together?
That's a great question. I think we have to be more persistent. We tend to sit and wait for our clients to come to us and say, what should I do? I think we have to be more proactive than that. I think we have to communicate with our clients before any of these life events and say, first of all, just getting out of the gate, so many folks don't have plans in place at all right now.
Right.
So to communicate with your clients and say, look, what have you been thinking? Every year, clients that meet with me to have their tax returns prepared, or if it's a mid-year meeting with them, I've been asking on a regular basis, who is your team? Has your will been updated? Have you updated your personal financial statement? Do you know what your net worth is? Do you know what you have at stake here? and what's going to happen when and if, right? So I think it's really important, again, that we try to get out in front of it to help these folks. As I mentioned to you before, Mike, it's a pay me now or pay me later proposition. If you don't put the plan in place and pay your advisors to be part of that planning up front, you're going to pay us even more after the fact.
Yep,
But there's
absolutely.
going to be a lot more pain and
It,
suffering involved for your family. One thing I want to touch base on, I want to take a step back to Eric's question and his answer. You know, one of the things that we tend to see in our profession as accountants is regarding small business owners. It's not unusual to see where dad started a business 30 years ago and had two sons, two daughters, whatever it may be. You look at the Kansas City Chiefs and the Hunt family, how they've handled things. They're going through it really well. Indianapolis Colts, Jim Irsay just passed, handled it apparently very well. But you could have a couple of kids that are working in the business with you, and there's a falling out because one of those kids didn't like the way dad was running the business, or he thought his brother or sister was having too much influence. They leave the business. 10 years later, dad passes away, and here they come back. They want their piece of the pie. They want to be in the business and tell you once again how to run it. That's where we fail to communicate. If we've made changes in a plan, especially when we're talking about where small businesses involved, it can get really ugly quickly.
Okay. All right. Well, great conversation, fellas. Thank you so much. And I just want to see, do we have anyone who's on watching our podcast? If they have any questions, all you have to do is go to the chat button and plug those in, and we'll see if there's any that come up. And I'll give that a few minutes. But you know, I'm glad we had this conversation because we all are experiencing the same thing, just slightly different. And I know that if we can improve our collaboration and help everyone work together, we will eliminate the outside influences. Not always, not entirely, but if we can just eliminate that, life will be so much better for these estates and these legacies to keep on going and keep families together. You know, I mean, it's part of what you're seeing nowadays. It's like after mom and dad, the patriarchs of the family go, kids, the children don't get together anymore. I mean,
Right.
that's not the way it's supposed to be. Yeah, you think back years ago when it was, you know, everyone lived in the same block, for God's sakes, you know. Now you're lucky if you live in the same area or even in the same state. So
Right.
I think it would be important that we can keep on going and keep this and keep the family traditions going. And I think it would be better for all of us. Okay. So I don't see any questions. So our next slide, Jessica. So let's just closing remarks. Okay. Communication is key to preserving your legacy. It's going to involve, folks, both your families and the planning professionals, and staying proactive and updating your plan on a regular basis is going to be the way that this is going to go smoothly, and it's going to fulfill the legacy that you worked so hard in putting together. And it's going to take some time. You don't have to overthink it, but you do have to give it some thought, and you do have to get your de facto team, if you don't already have a team in place, together to work together. And you know what? Yeah, there's going to be some cost involved, but it's going to be well worth it because it's going to save you, as Bill mentioned earlier, it's going to save you a heck of a lot more doing it now than it will be after you're no longer here. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Bill and Eric, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. If any of you out there listening would like to get more information, our podcast will be on the Client First Financial website, but we also have all the contact information for Eric, Bill, and myself right on this slide. If you forget or if you didn't have time to write it down, please reach out to our office and we'll be more than happy to send you their information. So I also want to thank our executive producer, Jessica Harnett from Social T, for keeping the slides moving so that we can focus on talking, fellas, rather
There you
than
go.
me trying to figure out technology, which I'm not that good at. But I do want to tell you our next podcast is going to be coming up in a couple of months. It's going to be about charitable planning and how that can be a major part of legacy planning. My guest on that podcast will be Laura McHugh, the Chief Engagement Officer of the United Way of the Greater Lehigh Valley. I'm looking forward to that. And by all means, gentlemen, you can listen in on that one as well. Laura's a good person, and I'm sure she's going to bring some tremendous insight. And then our final episode of our series here about legacy planning is going to be the trusted advisor. I just mentioned briefly, I'll have more on that. We're going to devote a whole segment on what is a trusted advisor, who that is, and what their role is in this whole segment of legacy planning. So, gentlemen, do you have any last comments before we say goodbye to everyone who's listening?
I just want to say, Mike, it's been great advice that you and Eric provided here today. Great service to your clients, and just thank you for letting me be part of it.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Eric.
Same thing, Mike. This has been a pleasure. Hopefully, our audience got something, of value out of this. It certainly was a pleasure for me, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Okay. Well,
Absolutely.
again, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And to everyone listening, thank you for participating. And we look forward to seeing you at our next podcast. All right, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.